So a lot of people have been saying, well, a grand jury indicted James Comey, so case closed. But unfortunately, that is not how this works. Hi, I'm Nate Charles, and welcome back to the Rule of Law Brief. Before we get into this, a quick note. I've already spoken about the James Comey indictment a couple times in prior videos. If you haven't watched those, I encourage you to go back and do that first. I'll put the links in the episode notes so you can find them more easily. What I want to do here is respond to some of the pushback I've been getting to those prior videos, because some of it is thoughtful and some of it is well-intentioned, and it raises a question that sounds persuasive on its face. Well, if James Comey was indicted by a grand jury, doesn't that legitimize the case? The short answer is no, but more importantly, I want to explain why. So first, yes, this was a grand jury indictment, but at the federal level, that is not some special validation of the charging decision. So under the Fifth Amendment, federal felony charges must go to a grand jury, unless the defendant waives that right. And when that happens, the government can proceed by what's called a criminal information. You'll see this in plea deals all the time. So yes, there are situations where a federal case can proceed without a grand jury. But absent a waiver in one of those special situations, federal felony prosecutions must go through a grand jury. Because a grand jury is required for felony charges under the Fifth Amendment, there are lots of federal grand juries. In fact, on any given day, there are dozens and dozens of them spread out among the 93 federal districts in the U.S. court system. On any given day throughout the United States, there are dozens of federal prosecutors presenting cases to dozens of grand juries available within their district. This is a very routine process. And in fact, most of those 93 federal districts have more than one grand jury going at a time. Now, what that means is it's very easy for federal prosecutors, especially during a politically motivated case, to shop for a grand jury that is going to do its bidding, which is yet another reason why the ethical onus of making sure that a charging decision is supported by probable cause lies with the prosecutor himself or herself, not the grand jury. Under ABA Model Rule 3.8, a prosecutor has an independent duty not to bring charges that are not supported by probable cause. That obligation belongs to the prosecutor. It cannot be outsourced to the grand jury. There is no ethics opinion anywhere, none, that says a prosecutor can bring a questionable or an improper case and then rely on the grand jury to validate it. It doesn't work that way. The responsibility remains with the prosecutor regardless of what the grand jury does. So, as a matter of legal doctrine pertaining to the ethics of attorneys, a grand jury indictment does not cure an improper charging decision. If a case is politically motivated, selectively prosecuted, or legally defective, the indictment does not fix that. Now, a lot of people assume that grand juries operate much like what are called petit juries or trial juries. They're neutral, they're adversarial, weighing both sides. But that's not how this works. Not even close. Grand jury proceedings are distinctly one-sided. The federal prosecutor presenting the indictment controls the evidence, selects the witnesses, frames the legal theory, and the defense isn't even allowed in the room. The Supreme Court has been explicit about this. In United States v. Williams, the court made it clear that prosecutors don't even have to present exculpatory evidence in a grand jury. So structurally, this is not a meaningful check on prosecutorial discretion. It's a charging mechanism. That's why the old line exists: a prosecutor can indict a ham sandwich. That's not literal, but it reflects the reality of how low the threshold is and how much control the prosecutor has over the process. A grand jury indictment establishes only one thing: probable cause. And that's a pretty low threshold. So, by definition, an indictment does not tell you this case is strong. It doesn't tell you that the evidence is persuasive. It doesn't even tell you that the prosecutor's case theory is legally sound. So, when you hear people like Todd Blanche say, but a grand jury indicted him, understand what that really means. It means the government used a constitutionally required charging mechanism. It made a one-sided presentation of the evidence. The grand jury itself met a low probable cause threshold. And more likely than not, the federal prosecutors shopped for a grand jury that they knew would be favorable to their case before any of this even kicked off. What it does not mean is that the case is strong, justified, or beyond scrutiny from an ethics standpoint. If you really want to evaluate the James Comey case, don't look at the grand jury indictment. Look at the statute. Look at the facts, and I'm genuinely interested to see what evidence they actually have. Look at the intent requirement, and look to see how similar cases are charged, or, in this case, not charged, because that's where the real legal analysis lives.